I think that, like, as I was saying earlier, that there's a structural, very, very violent, and intentional mode with which governance has been working in Nigeria in the past 10 years, with which that um, uh, right now there's a research that is showing that poverty itself taxes the cognitive capacity, so which is like the mental energy spent on survival, that leaves less room for the kind of sustained attention that reading or critical thinking actually demands. And knowing that, knowing that that is actually currently happening in Nigeria right now, where we are literally like the fourth most terrorized country in the world. We are literally almost the poverty capital of the world. We are nowhere safe. Security. There are multiple anxieties that you carry within yourself as Nigerians, as a Nigerian rather. So because of that, there's little to no room for intellectual engagement. And this is so because technically a well-read nation is a nation that asks questions.
Mm-hmm.
And right now it doesn't seem like, it seems like the mode of operation is that nobody actually gets to actually ask questions. In fact, if you ask questions, even as a Yoruba person, you're getting you're getting called out, you're getting bullied, they're sending you back to your house, they're telling you, "Where, Omwale," that kind of thing. So it's just very, very interesting to see how in Nigerian that we grew up in, which was not any, it wasn't like it was any better, has now come to Nigeria that is worse
Mm.
today. So and yeah, it's insane.
All right. In moving this conversation forward, let's look at writing and poetry in the age of AI. What becomes of the human writer? Where do we strike a balance? What really do we see? What are we seeing right now when it comes to the international writing community and either embracing or denouncing artificial intelligence? Where do you stand?
Well, as someone who doubles as a content designer in AI, working at a Fortune 50, I think that it's very important to say that there's really no anxiety regarding AI and writing. I don't think AI would ever become a good fiction or poetry writer. I don't think AI would actually ever write an award-winning poem.
Mm.
I think this actually, like, if it boils down to preference, it boils down to taste, it boils down to people who have actually spent so much time reading good poetry, finally, like, landing on slope and knowing very well that this doesn't sound human, and there's something that actually happens when you write a poem. It's called catharsis. When you actually write that poem and then you release, it seems like you're releasing into the world. You feel this sense. So when a reader actually finds your poem, it seems like they're actually like taking upon that release and they are taking it into themselves. So they are actually like loaded and heavy. You don't get that release when you read like a poem written by AI,
Mm.
because the language is flat, the metaphors are dead, the similes are predictable, it's overly logical, it's written as though it's actually like writing towards an expected end. You already see it. There are several ways with which you can actually detect this thing. So
Mm-hmm.
I tell friends that I don't think we should have an anxiety where, with AI taking up the world will return to us, as
Yeah,
the prophecy.
I like the way you put it. The world will return to the writers. In saying that, then why does Nigeria really need the poet and the writer in this time? Why should we consider poetry? Why should the average, the normal, the masses, the normal Nigerian look at writing, pick up a book? Why do we need it today?
It's very important that the writer actually, like, I mean, sorry, Nigerians, or in fact by extension Africans, return to that time where we were the people who actually read. Who were the Nigeria was known to be the most educated country at some point in Africa, and this is then not about um, it's not about being educated or not. It's about actually like waging war against the intentional violence, structural de-educationalization of Nigeria. You know, by reading, you're building your own consciousness to revolt against. You're building up your own muscle to actually think. You're thinking with a writer who is thinking, so therefore you are also like thinking.
Mm.
And we need to come to that point in life or as a people where we decide that yes, they have systematically. And the good thing is that government cannot regulate the way that we read or what we read online. They can you can go find several journals online to read poems by people, not necessarily just Nigerians, where they're actually like talking about the really human struggle that you as Nigerians can actually see yourself also currently going through. And the means of expression, we need to build up expression again,
Mm.
not just LOL, LOL, or all of the very interesting catchphrases that the cruise culture on social media actually uses. We need to be able to sit up and write up a good response to governmental propaganda. We need to be able to actually in fact quote books when we are literally out on the streets protesting, because
Mm.
technically we're reaching back into the archive. Nigeria right now, in fact, the Nigerian National Library does not have books by contemporary Nigerian poets or contemporary Nigerian writers. Nigerian National does not even stock that. So it's it would be the first step to whatever it is the revolution is concerning reading.
Mm.
But if we do not have that, where do we then turn to? So it seems like all of this is very systematic. It seems like education is not even like in the agenda. Education is not seen um, funding. So the only way with which you can do that is to then return to this education because they are trying to take it from us. So, and how do we do that? By actually going back to reading, by reading what the poet has said about the government, by reading what the poet has said about the society.
Mm.
It reminds me of Niyo Shudare's poem, which I quote to my students all the time.
Not my
Not my
business.
business.
Yeah, not my
Yeah,
business.
yeah.
All right. Quickly, let's get into your own book. It's a multi-award winning book, The Years of Blood. It says something very deep and bleak about Nigeria. You want to speak about this book and why it's relevant to us today?
Yeah. So the Years of Blood is a collection of poems that I had to like sit up and after I left Nigeria to write about, which is something that we all have experienced. If you ask anybody in Nigeria randomly on the street if they know someone who has been kidnapped, they probably would. If it's not them, if the the probability that you would meet somebody who was kidnapped and found is very low. However, the probability that you would meet somebody that knows somebody that has been kidnapped before is very high, which means that for every five people, one person is already missing because they were kidnapped. And this did not start today. If you, I spent so much time reading archiver.ng, which is great work they're doing archiving the Nigerian history through newspapers. And what I found was that as far back as 1955, as far back as 1960, as far back as 1980, there are several news about ritual killings,
Mm.
ritual killings for ritualistic purposes, killings for money ritual, among other things. And I grew up on a street in Ibadan called Ogunleye Street, very close to Liberty Stadium, now known as the Obafemi Awolowo Stadium. On this street, I grew up with some boys. Many of those boys have been were kidnapped as children,
Mm.
and many of them are no longer today. Some of them we saw their bodies already mutilated, already dismembered. Some of them we saw their school uniforms. So I think again it bears the consciousness of the writer to actually help the society think, because we are such a society that do not remember. It seems as though we suffer from, because of the need to actually survive, we suffer from amnesia.
Yeah, a
And
collective amnesia.
yeah, the collective amnesia, the fact that we know this thing, it's like we need a group therapy as a people. Like we need everybody needs to like sit in a town hall and then listen to somebody asking questions about, so how. So the collector form is actually like me writing about the trauma that I experienced from kidnapping as a child, growing up and seeing that it doesn't get better, it gets worse for kidnapping and ritual killings. And this does not even like, leave out religious borders. Whether you're Muslim or Christian, we've seen, or traditional worshiper, we've seen all of the three tiers, actively participating in ritual killings, kidnapping, forced disappearance. And again, the consciousness is also that all of this has happened very close to national elections or nationwide elections. So it begs the question of whether this is actually like, funded and promoted by the government. And today we still do not have a law that actually criminalizes ritual killings in Nigeria, which is distasteful.
All right. In just 30 seconds, as a Nigerian in the diaspora, as a writer, as a poet, in just 30 seconds, do you still have a hope for this nation?
Yes, I mean, I am Nigerian. I believe that at least I know that I belong to a network of friends that are doing everything humanly possible to make sure that Nigeria is returns to the map of integrity, of education, of brilliance, of creative writing. And regarding creative writing, Nigeria today is actually like excelling on the world map. We have several Nigerian writers who have won several international awards, although while that does not entirely reflect in the nation, because the nation is actively trying to actually push out intellectual voices. It does tell something about how Nigerians are resilient and
All
how they
right.
excel in a community that actually works for education. So yes.